vampires in Iraq. Okay, so right back to it. We're gonna finish this. We've done like 3-4 hours so far today straight. Pick some of the following from Fran. Pick some of the following for Fran to mail to Nick on postcards. Other CIA doc. Use a lot of these in sermons you prepare for church guest appearance. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. Bertrand Russell. Some of these ideas, all of these ideas, tap into the artistic tradition of the Western canon as I see it, of humanity in general. I don't even have to stick to the Western canon. You don't like my words? Well, look in my sources. They're not my words. I'm just gathering stuff to put before you. I just set the table. I didn't make the food. The release of atom power has changed everything except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind. If only I had known, I should have become a watchmaker. Albert Einstein, regretting the fact that he played such a prominent role in the military-industrial complex. The direct use of force is such a poor solution to any problem. It is generally employed only by small children and large nations. David Friedman. So now I'm drawing the scope back out and trying to contextualize all this craziness. I think I finished the books, or I'm finishing these books, and I'm starting to draw the bigger picture of the moral framework into which we're going to put this dramatic story. I'm not, so this, when I think about why did I become so idealistic, where did I get all this stuff? I had inherent ideals from just going to church all the time as a conservative Christian and having very idealistic parents who, when I'm adult and we talk about their childhood and how they met and their romances and stuff, they tell me about how idealistic they were when they met, and they were like, we wanted to change the world and we believed in this. My dad told me recently, I forgot, when he met my mom, he wouldn't call God God, he would call him Lou. And my mom was super Christian, and she was like, stop being so blasphemous. And he was like, oh, I talked to Lou. Me and Lou have conversations. But they've forgotten some of it, but they're very anti-authoritarian, idealistic, and they've just fallen into these ruts. One of them is like Fox News and all this other bullshit propaganda, which is another part of my life. I'm going to get into how much bullshit my society is putting into my parents' head and find out the sources of this bullshit, and I'm going to have a conversation with those sources. But that's completely different. That's for another time. But there's a reason why I call myself Shaz Barbaric, and that's because we're going to have these conversations. We're going to have them very directly. This is all I have to do. I have nothing but time. That we're just going to slowly but surely start figuring out what the fuck is going on in the world. There are no atheists in foxholes. That's not an argument against atheism. It's an argument against foxholes. James Morrow. I paraphrased that earlier. Sometimes I think it should be a rule of war that you have to be somebody up close and get to know him before you can shoot him. That was MASH, that show. Colonel Potter. A soldier will fight long and hard for a bit of colored ribbon. It's Napoleon. How cynical is that guy? The world has achieved brilliance without wisdom, power without conscience. Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about the war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. Homer Bradley. Every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, the hope of its children. It is not a way of life, and it is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the clouds of a war, it is humanity hanging on a cross of iron. Dwight D. Eisenhower speech, American Society of Newspaper Editors, 16th April, 1953. That was the military-industrial complex speech. Everyone's a pacifist between wars. It's like being a vegetarian between meals. Coleman McCarthy. Nations have recently been led to borrow billions for war. No nation has ever borrowed largely for education. Probably no nation is rich enough to pay for both war and civilization. We must make our choice. We cannot have both. Abraham Flexner. Draft beer, not people. Attributed to Bob Dylan. The problem in defense is how far you can go without destroying from within what you're trying to defend from without. Dwight D. Eisenhower. War will exist until that distant day when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige that the warrior does today. John F. Kennedy. Join the army, see the world, meet interesting people, and kill them. Pacifist Badge, 1978. Make badges like these, have Fran send Nick one. He was at odds with his brother being a soldier, and he feels guilty. Some of these are in the truck when they take off. Fran is sheepish about this. Never think that war, no matter how necessary, nor how justified, is not a crime. It's Ernest Hemingway. War makes thieves and peace hangs them. George Herbert. You can no more win a war than you can win an earthquake. Janet Rankin. Sometime, day, they'll give a war and nobody will come. Carl Sandburg. We kind of thought Christ went again, war and pillage. James Russell Lowell. If we let people see that kind of thing, there would never be another war. Pentagon official explaining why the U.S. military censored graphic footage from the Gulf War. War would end if the dead could return. Stanley Baldwin. It is forbidden to kill. Therefore, all murderers are punished, unless they kill in large numbers and to the sound of trumpets. Voltaire. War. If it's natural to kill, why do men have to go into training to learn how? Joan Baez. What would you do if? It is not only the living who are killed in war. Isaac Asimov. Records and History. All wars are follies, very expensive and very mischievous ones. In my opinion, there never was a good war or a bad peace. When will mankind be convinced and agree to settle their difficulties by arbitration? Benjamin Franklin. Man is the only animal that deals in that atrocity of atrocities, war. He is the only one that gathers his brethren about him and goes forth in cold blood and calm pulse to exterminate his kind. He is the only animal that for sordid wages will march out and help to slaughter strangers of his own species who have done him no harm and with whom he has no quarrel. And in the intervals between campaigns he washes the blood off his hands and works for the universal brotherhood of man with his mouth. Mark Twain. Patriots always talk of dying for their country and never of killing for their country. Bertrand Russell. Attributed Flip This on Its Head in CIA doc film interviews where I talk about being ready to kill for my country. Not sure what I meant about that. You cannot prevent and prepare for war at the same time. Albert Einstein. They wrote in the old days that it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. But in modern war, there is nothing sweet nor fitting to die. But in modern war, there is nothing sweet nor fitting in your dying. You will die like a dog for no good reason. Ernest Hemingway. Fan wrote this one, but thought twice. Instead, sent the book. The ability and inclination to use physical strength is no indication of bravery or tenacity to life. The greatest cowards are often the greatest bullies. Nothing is cheaper and more common than physical bravery. Clarence Darrow. Resist not evil. I think war might be God's way of teaching us geography. Paul Rodriguez. The era of true peace on earth will not come as long as a tremendous percentage of your taxes goes to educate men in the trades of slaughter. Reginald Wright Kaufman. We have failed to grasp the fact that mankind is becoming a single unit, and that for a unit to fight against itself is suicide. Havelock Ellis. War is the only game in which it doesn't pay to have the home court advantage. Dick Motta. Have a commander say this to his troops, elaborates about the fighting them in Iraq, so you don't have to fight them back home, which was a George Bush saying. War is fear cloaked in courage. William Westmoreland. The military doesn't start wars, politicians starts wars. William Westmoreland. Another commander back in the Pitbull vein. Fighting for peace is like screwing for virginity. Author unknown. Man has no right to kill his brother. It is no excuse that he does so in uniform. He only adds the infamy of servitude to the crime of murder. Percy Bryce Shelley, A Declaration of Rights. To kill a man is not to defend a doctrine, but to kill a man. Michael Servetus. Law never made men a whit more just, and by means of the respect for it, even the well-disposed are daily made the agents of injustice. A common and natural result of an undue respect for law is that you may see a file of soldiers, colonel, captain, corporal, privates, powder monkeys, and all marching in admirable order over hill and dale to the wars, against their wills, against their common sense and consciences, which makes it very steep marching indeed, and produces a palpitation of the heart. They have no doubt that it is a damnable business in which they are concerned. They're all peaceably inclined. Now, what are they? Men at all? Or small movable forts and magazines, at the service of some unscrupulous man in power? The mass of men serve the state thus, not as men mainly, but as machines with their bodies. In most cases, there is no free exercise whatever of the judgment or of the moral sense, but they put themselves on a level with wood and earth and stones, and wooden men can perhaps be manufactured that will serve the purpose as well. Henry David Thoreau, On Duty of Civil Disobedience, a paraphrase of my straw man idea. A day of battle is a day of harvest for the devil. William Hook, Crazy Commander again, Bloodlust. There is nothing that war has ever achieved that we could not better achieve without it. Havelock Ellis. All wars are civil wars, because all men are brothers. Francois Fenelon. Why do we kill people who are killing people to show that killing people is wrong? Holly Near. The pioneers of a warless world are the youth who refuse military service. Albert Einstein. O Lord our God, help us tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of their guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless with their little children to wander unfriended the wastes of their desolated lands in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun, flames of summer and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for refuge of the grave, and denied it. Mark Twain, The War Prayer. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. Help us to wring the hearts of their unoffending widows with unavailing grief. Help us to turn them out roofless, with their little children to wander unfriended the wastes of their desolated land in rags and hunger and thirst, sports of the sun, flames of summer, and the icy winds of winter, broken in spirit, worn with travail, imploring thee for the refuge of the grave, and denied it. It's a way with words. That's that guy. Mark Twain, that guy had a way with words. You know, my opinion anyways. Write an updated version as a slam poem. War is an ugly thing, but not the ugliest of things. The decayed and degraded state of moral and patriotic feelings which think that nothing is worth war is much worse. The person who has nothing for which he is willing to fight, nothing for which is more important than his own personal safety, is a miserable creature and has no chance of being free, unless made and kept so by the exertion of better men than himself. John Stuart Mill. This is the response of one of the sergeants who intercepts Fran's postcard, tells Nick with a snarl, "This is a bad first sergeant. It has an impression at camp." So we have both sides. Most of these quotes are anti-war, but some of them defend war. Let's have an honest discussion. Let's put up John Stuart Mill against Albert Einstein. Who's smarter? Who's more human? Put him up against Mark Twain. Is Mark Twain being ignorant? Let's have a discussion is all I want. Have a discussion. And right now, I'm starting it with myself. And then we're going to go from there. The object of war is not to die for your country, but to make the other bastard die for his. George Patton. The expendability factor has increased by being transferred from the specialized, scarce, and expensively trained military personnel to the amorphous civilian population. American strategists have calculated the proportion of civilians killed in this century's major wars. In the First World War, 5% of those killed were civilians. In the Second World War, 48%, while in a Third World War, 90 to 95% would be civilian. Colin Ward, Anarchy in Action. Similar to Zinn's Modern Warfare's War Against Women and Children. That's Howard Zinn. That's what I wrote on my cardboard when I went and stood on the corner protesting the war before it started. War is not an adventure. It is a disease. It's like typhus. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. That's the guy who wrote The Little Prince. In an incredible pervasion of justice, former soldiers who sprayed festeringly poisonous chemicals on Vietnam and now find today that they themselves have been damaged by them, appeal to the people for sympathy and charity. The effects of the defoliant, Agent Orange, are discussed at length, but not one single newspaper article or hearing that we are aware of has even mentioned the effects of the people who still live in those regions in Vietnam. It's as outlandish as if Nazis who gassed the Jews were now to come forward and whine about the poisons they utilized that had finally made them sick. The staggering monstrousness goes unlaughed at and even unnoticed, as in a Kafka novel. Fred Woodworth, The Match, number 79. This is what I call derealization. When I think about what the objective reality that we live in is, from me reading these stories and reclaiming my humanity and looking around my life, personal life, business life, romantic life, what character means, what living as an honest human being, an honest man means, and trying to have integrity in this world. And then I look at the cultural narrative, and you see the type of duplicitousness that we dropped Agent Orange on Vietnam, and we created hell on earth for millions of people. And then the soldiers who came back, we worried about the effects of that chemical on them. And this person says, not one single newspaper article or hearing that we are aware of even mention the effects on the people who still live in those regions in Vietnam. It's outlandish, as if the Nazis who gassed the Jews were now to come forward and whine that they pose. So the Nazis who gassed the Jews, if they were to come forward and whine that the poisons that they utilize had made them sick. Like, fuck the Jews we gas. Oh my gosh, we use. And then the other Germans say, oh my gosh, we were so hard on you, man. It's so bad we made you use those chemicals in the gas chambers. And we're totally ignoring the bodies in the gas chambers, the bodies in Vietnam, the bodies in Iraq. Harold Pinter. There's a reason why Harold Pinter, when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize around this time, had that speech, Nobel speech. He was trying to break through this cloud. This is what the artist does. I haven't written what Harold Pinter's what he's written. I don't have his status. I don't have his mind. But I could recognize that he was right back then. I could recognize, and that's what I relate to my drug taking. I get the same feeling from taking psychedelics and this world going away. I mean, going into my mind and then coming back to this world and checking what reality means and what truth means in that shamanic tradition of checking all of your firmly held beliefs. That's why you took him at manhood, when you came of age, at certain points in your life, before you go into war, before you go and do a heavy thing, after, as a ceremonial rite when people die. You're checking what you believe and reaffirming your narrative, reaffirming your identity, because that's the foundation of all your strength of conviction, what allows you to see death in the face. What Cary Grant said that after dropping, was it Cary Grant, one of those Hollywood guys, when acid was legal, took over 100 doses in therapy sessions and said it made him irresistibly attractive to women. Why? Because by solidifying his narrative and checking in his mind and who he is to the core of his being through psychedelics, opening up all the doors that would take you years of therapy to open up, he solidified his personal narrative, and that makes you irresistible to women because they're attracted to strength of conviction. They're attracted to what you call big dick energy, to swag. That's just knowing who you are. And if you can take a shitload of psychedelics and come back unshattered and unified, don't. It's a very dangerous practice. Don't jump off a cliff skydiving if you don't know what the fuck you're doing. The dangers are psychosis and death, but it's a practice which can help you with your personal narrative if you do it the right way. I don't advise people to do it. I don't want that liability, but in my personal experience, it's helped me with my life. But I relate that to the propaganda machine and the culture in which we live. That same derealization of not knowing what's real, what's not, that's what I get when I watch the news. I get the feeling of psychedelics. It's a mind fuck to listen to narratives so detached from reality, to listen to constant propaganda streams that are so detached from objective reality. It's a fucking trip. It's like, am I tripping right now? Because that's what, when you're looking at someone, you're like, oh shit, do they have good or bad intentions for me? Do they, you see danger everywhere? You really have to calm the fuck down. Set and setting. Make sure you're with good people you trust if you're with people, or that you're in a safe setting. Don't be fucking on the roof. Don't be in a place of danger. Don't go play in traffic, because you don't know what's real, what's not. When you're taking psychedelics, your spirit walking through another world, which is laid upon this world. And now you're questioning all of your assumptions. You don't even know if this is your body. You know, you might be in a place where everything goes, and you just lay back and you just go for the ride. Well, that type of questioning of reality and basic assumptions is what we're doing every fucking day when we're denied a true historic record. So that's, I believe, in my writing and my explanation of the world, where I'm getting to. That we have the social disintegration, the disintegration of our social fabric caused by the derealization, the psychosis, very similar to psychedelics, caused by purposefully obscuring our human narrative at a personal level all the way to the social level, confusing you about sexual identity, confusing you about real historic record, confusing you about every social bond you have. Social media, the same problems we have in media with the consolidation of media power, now we have in our social fabric when we have corporations as the intermediaries for all of our social bonds. If you want to fuck, you go through Tinder. If you have friends, you find them on Facebook. If you want information, you get it through Reddit. If you want to know anything about the world on the internet, you go through Google, which is building its own sandbox, the APM or whatever, AMP, where like now you visit websites, you never leave Google sandbox. Corporations are becoming your intermediary to reality. And their control over information and over what objective reality is causing a form of psychosis that personally feels a lot like the psychedelics I take, which is one of the reasons why I take the psychedelics, to practice constructing my own reality, to help inoculate myself against propaganda. I've always felt since I was young, that weed helps inoculate you against propaganda by helping you to question assumptions, because weed is a low-grade psychedelic. Take some edibles at a high dose and you'll see that. You'll get auditory visual hallucinations. You'll check out of this world. Weed is a fucking psychedelic. It's at a low grade, so it's very safe to use, and it definitely shakes your Etch-a-Sketch. You have an Etch-a-Sketch, and all this propaganda narratives are just filling up your Etch-a-Sketch. Weed shakes the fucking Etch-a-Sketch. If you really want to fucking blank your mind, be careful, because you're going to have to put shit back in there. So make sure you have a safe place, and you have good people in your life, and you have a good routine where you're going to work, or you have a pattern to keep your rhythms good, where you're going to work, getting esteem, getting money, taking care of yourself. But stay weeded if you can. Spend a couple weeks, spend a month or two, fucking high as fuck every day, and you'll find that you'll start questioning a lot of your assumptions. I don't know if I should advise that. Again, I'm not a medical person. I'm just telling you what works on me. But when I started getting into the Down Eastern philosophy at the beginning of this year, smoked a shitload of weed in order to fucking just kind of like uproot a lot of the narratives that had been seeping into my brain, because this stuff can be consciously put into your head and then could be like passively put into your head. So you have to humble yourself with the fact that even if you think you're very smart and you're very aware, all of this noise around you can be seeping into your brain, and it seeped into mine over 5 or 6 years. So this whole year has been me auditing what is in my head, what can I stand by, and what do I have to let go. Process of maturing, and I feel like we're in the 11th month of November, and it's been a helpful process. And I am a very different person than when I started, but at the same time, I'm very much more like I was when I wrote this. So I'm a different person than the real estate dude making money, for the better though. I still have that skill set, and I still know how to make money, know how to make a business. I had $500,000 in my hand, so I know I'll have it again. But I also have more of my humanity, my breadcrumbs. I had to leave that gingerbread house because it was a wicked witch's house. It wasn't. We're gonna have comfort, but we're gonna have comfort, and we're also gonna have the comfort of the dignity of my values. In this life, I promised myself I'm not only gonna have comfort. I know I'm capable. Since I was young, I knew I can make money. I knew I can figure things out. But I'm also gonna have the dignity of my values. I'm not gonna sacrifice them for comfort. It's a promise I made myself. Real quick, we're going to read what Harold Pinter had to say, someone who I believe also made that promise. And that's his anger that came through before he died, when he got the Nobel Prize, which was a stage. And so like Michael Moore, when he came up on the Oscar stage and shamed all of Hollywood. And when they booed him, they shamed themselves, because that's the historic record. Look up that video. Those people booed him. So indirectly, they supported the war. So look up that video at the people who booed Michael Moore. Fuck those guys. They took their stand in history, and they took the wrong stand, and they're going to have to live by it, because all you have to do in life is be responsible for your actions. That's all you have to do. Art, Truth, and Politics. In 1958, I wrote the following. There are no hard distinctions between what is real and what is unreal, nor between what is true and what is false. A thing is not necessarily either true or false. It can be both true and false. I believe that these assertions still make sense and do still apply to the exploration of reality through art. So as a writer, I stand by them. But as a citizen, I cannot. As a citizen, I must ask, what is true? What is false? Truth in drama is forever elusive. You never quite find it, but the search for it is compulsive. The search is clearly what drives the endeavor. The search is your task. More often than not, you stumble upon the truth in the dark, colliding with it, or just glimpsing an image or a shape which seems to correspond to the truth, often without realizing that you have done so. But the real truth is that there never was any such thing as one truth to be found in dramatic art. There are many. These truths challenge each other, recoil from each other, reflect each other, ignore each other, tease each other, are blind to each other. Sometimes you feel you have the truth of a moment in your hand, then it slips through your fingers and is lost. I've often been asked how my plays come about. I cannot say, nor can I even sum up my plays, except to say that this is what happened, this is what they said, this is what they did. Most of the plays are engendered by a line, a word, or an image. The given word is often shortly followed by the image. I shall give 2 examples of 2 lines which came right out of the blue into my head, followed by an image, followed by me. The plays are The Homecoming and Old Times. The first line of The Homecoming is, "What have you done with the scissors?" The first line of Old Times is, "Dark." In each case, I had no further information. In the first case, someone was obviously looking for a pair of scissors and was demanding their whereabouts of someone else he suspected had probably stole them. But I somehow knew that the person addressed didn't give a damn about the scissors or about the questioner either, for that matter. Dark, I took to be a description of someone's hair, the hair of a woman, and was the answer to a question. In each case, I found myself compelled to pursue the matter. This happened visually, a very slow fade through shadow into light. I always started a play by calling the characters A, B, and C. In the play that became The Homecoming, I saw a man enter the stark room and ask his question of a younger man sitting on an ugly sofa reading a racing paper. I somehow suspected that A was the father and that B was his son, but I had no proof. This was, however, confirmed a short time later when B, later to become Lenny, says to A, later to become Max, "Dad, do you mind if I change the subject? I want to ask you something. The dinner we had before, what was the name of it? What did you call it? Why don't you buy a dog? You're a dog cook. Honestly, you think you're cooking a lot for a lot of dogs." So since B calls A dad, it seemed to me reasonable to assume that they were father and son. A was also clearly the cook, and his cooking did not seem to be held in high regard. Did this mean that there was no mother? I didn't know, but as I told myself at the time, our beginning never know our ends. Dark, a large window, evening sky, a man, A, later to become Dealey, and a woman, B, later to become Kate, sitting with drinks. Fat or thin, the man asked. Who are they talking about? But I then see standing at the window a woman, C, later to become Anna, in another condition of light, her back to them, her hair dark. It's a strange moment, the moment of creating characters who, up to that moment, had no existence. What follows is fitful, uncertain, even hallucinatory, although sometimes it can be an unstoppable avalanche. The author's position is an odd one. In a sense, he is not welcomed by the characters. The characters resist him. They are not easy to live with. They are impossible to define. You certainly can't dictate to them. To a certain extent, you play a never-ending game with them, cat and mouse, blind man's bluff, hide and seek. But finally, you find that you have people of flesh and blood on your hands, people with will and an individual sensibility of their own, made out of component parts you are unable to change, manipulate, or distort. So language and art remains a highly ambiguous transaction, a quicksand, a trampoline, a frozen pool which might give way under you, the author, at any time. But as I have said, the search for truth can never stop. It cannot be adjourned. It cannot be postponed. It has to be faced right there on the spot. Political theater presents an entirely different set of problems. Sermonizing has to be avoided at all costs. Objectivity is essential. The characters must be allowed to breathe their own air. The author cannot confine and constrict them to satisfy his own taste or disposition or prejudice. He must be prepared to approach them from a variety of angles, from a full and uninhibited range of perspectives. Take them by surprise, perhaps, occasionally, but nevertheless give them the freedom to go which way they will. This does not always work, and political satire, of course, adheres to none of these precepts. In fact, does precisely the opposite, which is its proper function. In my play, The Birthday Party, I think I allow a whole range of options to operate in a dense forest of possibility before finally focusing on an act of subjugation. Mountain language pretends to no such range of operation. It remains brutal, short, and ugly. But the soldiers in the play do get some fun out of it. One sometimes forgets that torturers become easily bored. They need a bit of a laugh to keep their spirits up. This has been confirmed, of course, by the events at Abu Ghraib in Baghdad. Mountain language lasts only 20 minutes, but it could go on for an hour after hour, on and on and on, the same pattern repeated over and over again, on, hour after hour. Ashes to Ashes, on the other hand, seems to me to be taking place underwater. A drowning woman, her hand reaching up through the waves, dropping down out of sight, reaching for others, but finding nobody there, either above or under the water, finding only shadows, reflections floating. The woman, a lost figure in a drowning landscape, a woman unable to escape the doom that seemed to belong only to others. But as they died, she must die too. Political language used by politicians does not venture into any of this territory, since the majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are interested not in truth, but in power, and in the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it is essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives. What surrounds us, therefore, is a vast tapestry of lies upon which we feed. As every single person here knows, the justification for the invasion of Iraq was Saddam Hussein possessed a highly dangerous body of weapons of mass destruction, some of which could be fired in 45 minutes, bringing about appalling devastation. We were assured that it was true. It was not true. We were told that Iraq had a relationship with Al-Qaeda and shared responsibility for the atrocity in New York of September 11, 2001. We were assured that this was true. It was not true. We were told that Iraq threatened the security of the world. We were assured that this was true. it was not true. The truth is something entirely different. The truth is to do with how the United States understands its role in the world and how it chooses to embody it. But before I come back to the present, I would like to look at the recent past, by which I mean the United States foreign policy since the end of the Second World War. I believe it is obligatory upon us to subject this period to at least some kind of even limited scrutiny, which is all the time we allow here. Everyone knows what happened in the Soviet Union and throughout Eastern Europe during the post-war period. The systemic brutality, the widespread atrocities, the ruthless suppression of independent thought. All this has been fully documented and verified. But my contention here is that the U.S. crimes in the same period have only been superficially recorded, let alone documented, let alone acknowledged, let alone recognized as crimes at all. I believe this must be addressed, and that the truth has considerable bearing on where the world stands now. Although constrained to a certain extent by the existence of the Soviet Union, the United States' actions throughout the world made it clear that it has concluded it has carte blanche to do what it liked. Direct invasion of a sovereign state has never in fact been America's favored method. In the main, it has preferred what is described as low-intensity conflict. Low-intensity conflict means that thousands of people die, but slower than if you dropped a bomb on them in one fell swoop. It means that you infect the heart of the country, that you establish a malignant growth, and watch the gangrene bloom. When the populace has been subdued or beaten to death, the same thing, and your own friends, the military and the great corporations, sit comfortably in power, you go before the camera and say that democracy has prevailed. This was a commonplace in U.S. foreign policy in the years after to which I refer. The tragedy of Nicaragua was a highly significant case. I choose to offer it here as a potent example of America's view of its role in the world, both then and now. I was present at a meeting at the U.S. Embassy in London in the late 1980s. The United States Congress was about to decide whether to give more money to the Contras in their campaign against the state of Nicaragua. I was a member of the delegation speaking on behalf of Nicaragua, but the most important member of this delegation was a Father John Metcalf. The leader of the U.S. body was Raymond Seitz, then number 2 to the ambassador, later ambassador himself. Father Metcalf said, "Sir, I'm in charge of a parish in the north of Nicaragua. My parishioners built a school, a health center, a cultural center. We have lived in peace. A few months ago, a Contra force attacked the parish. They destroyed everything, the school, the health center, the cultural center. They raped nurses and teachers, slaughtered doctors in the most brutal manner. They behaved like savages. Please demand that the U.S. government withdraw its support from this shocking terrorist activity." Raymond Seitz had a very good reputation as a rational, responsible, and highly intelligent, sophisticated man. He was greatly respected in diplomatic circles. He listened, paused, and then spoke with some gravity. "Father," he said, "let me tell you something. In war, innocent people always suffer." There was a frozen silence. We stared at him. He did not flinch. Innocent people indeed always suffer. Finally, somebody said, "But in this case, innocent people were the victims of a gruesome atrocity subsidized by your government, one among many. If Congress allows the Contras more money, further atrocities of this kind will take place. Is this not the case? Is your government not therefore guilty of supporting acts of murder and destruction upon the citizens of a sovereign state?" Seitz was imperturbable, in whatever that word is. "I don't agree that the facts as presented support your assertions," he said. And as we were leaving the embassy, a U.S. aide told me that he enjoyed my plays. I did not reply. I should remind you at the time that President Reagan made the following statement: "The Contras are the moral equivalent of our founding fathers." The United States supported the brutal Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua for over 40 years. The Nicaraguan people, led by the Sandinistas, overthrew this regime in 1979. A breathtaking popular revolution. As an aside, I dated a girl who was half Nicaraguan, half Honduran. So we, as human beings within this world, suffer the fallout of these atrocities that our government promotes. You don't think that went into her story and her narrative? The girl that I fell in love with in my 20s who's addicted to heroin is half Puerto Rican? You don't think our colonization of Puerto Rico has somehow defunded or destabilized her narrative and her personal story? These are all lighter shades of what we're doing in Iraq. Empire is destroying the moral fabric of the society that we all live in, not just on a national scale, but at a global scale. The Sandinistas weren't perfect. They possessed their fair share of arrogance, and their political philosophy contained a number of contradictory elements, but they were intelligent, rational, civilized. They set out to establish a stable, decent, pluralistic society. The death penalty was abolished. Hundreds of thousands of poverty-stricken peasants were brought back from the dead. Over 100,000 families were given title to land. 2,000 schools were built. A quite remarkable literacy campaign was reduced illiteracy in the country to less than 1/7. Free education was established and a free health service. Infant mortality was reduced by a third. Polio was eradicated. The United States denounced these achievements as Marxist-Leninist subversion. In the view of the U.S. government, a dangerous example was being set. If Nicaragua was allowed to establish basic norms of social and economic growth, if it was allowed to raise the standards of health care and education and achieve social unity and national self-respect, neighboring countries would ask the same questions and do the same things. There was, of course, at the time, fierce resistance to the status quo in El Salvador. I spoke earlier about a tapestry of lies which surround us. President Reagan calmly described Nicaragua as a totalitarian dungeon. This was taken generally by the media, and certainly by the British government, as an accurate and fair comment. But there was in fact no record of death squads under the Sandinista government. There was no record of torture. There was no record of systemic or official military brutality. No priests were ever murdered in Nicaragua. There was in fact 3 priests in the government, 2 Jesuits, and a Maryknoll missionary. The totalitarian dungeons were actually next door, in El Salvador and Guatemala. The United States has brought down the democratically elected government of Guatemala in 1954, and it is estimated that over 200,000 people have been victims of successive military dictatorships. Remember, we had the guy from El Salvador, one of the 9 top imperial leaders from our top universities, going to Iraq. If you don't know the past and don't know the imperial past of America, then you won't be connecting the dots of who these people are and what's going on. Anyways, 6 of the most distinguished Jesuits in the world were viciously murdered at the Central American University in San Salvador in 1989 by a battalion of the Alcatel Regiment trained at Fort Benning, Georgia, USA. That extremely brave man, Archbishop Romero, was assassinated while saying Mass. It is estimated that 75,000 people died. Why were they killed? They were killed because they believed a better life was possible and should be achieved. That belief immediately qualified them as communists. They died because they dared to question the status quo, the endless plateau of poverty, disease, degradation, and oppression, which had been their birthright. The United States finally brought down the Sandinista government. It took some years and considerable resistance, but relentless economic persecution and 30,000 dead finally undermined the spirit of the Nicaraguan people. They were exhausted and poverty-stricken once again. The casinos moved back into the countries. Free healthcare and free education were over. Big business returned with a vengeance. Democracy had prevailed. But this policy was by no means, this is a democracy we're bringing to Iraq. Once you understand the script, you understand what music they're playing, what tune they're playing the musical chairs to. But this policy was by no means restricted to Central America. It was conducted throughout the world. It was never ending, and it is as if it never happened. This derealization. We're not allowed to talk about reality in real terms, only in propagandist terms. The United States supported and in many cases engendered every right-wing military dictatorship in the world after the end of the Second World War. I refer to Indonesia, home of Barack Obama, Greece, Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, Haiti, Turkey, the Philippines, or was he from the Philippines? I don't know, I forget. Guatemala, El Salvador, and of course Chile. The horror of the United States inflicted upon Chile in 1973 can never be purged and can never be forgiven. And guess what? They just found out that they killed fucking Pablo Neruda too, who was a Pablo Picasso of poetry. Probably the best poetry humanity ever created, and we killed him for political means. Hundreds of thousands of deaths took place throughout these countries. Did they take place? And are they, in all cases, attributed to the U.S. foreign policy? The answer is yes, they did take place. And yes, they are attributed to American foreign policy. But you wouldn't know it. It never happened. Nothing ever happened. Even while it was happening, it wasn't happening. It didn't matter. It was of no interest. The crimes of the United States have been systemic, constant, vicious, remorseless. But very few people have actually talked about them. You have to hand it to America. It has exercised a quite clinical manipulation of the power worldwide while masquerading as a force of universal good. It's brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis. You know who's playing the hypnotist right now? The fucking, the CEO of the Marvel Universe is highly embedded within the Trump campaign. And he's giving them advice on how to run the fucking veteran affairs right now. That's why he came up in the news. So Marvel Universe, how are they keeping us obscured from reality now? Through all these fucking false, creating universes and creating worlds in which the CIA and the military are the heroes. When the facts on the ground and the reality are that we're just exercising our imperial ambitions around the world. And the fucking younger generations on the internet are just eating this up, becoming more and more deluded, more and more further against reality. Is that why they're exhibiting high degrees of psychosis? I put to you that the United States is without a doubt the greatest show on the road. Brutal, indifferent, scornful, and ruthless it may be, but it is also very clever. As a salesman, it is out on its own, and its most sellable commodity is self-love. It's a winner. Listen to all American presidents on television say the words, the American people, as in the sentence, I say to the American people, it is time to pray and to defend the rights of the American people. And I say to the American people to trust the president in the action he's about to take on behalf of the American people. It's a scintillating stratagem. Language is actually employed to keep thought at bay. The words, the American people, provide the true voluptuous cushion of reassurance. You don't need to think, just lie back on that cushion. The cushion may be suffocating your intelligence and your critical faculties, but it's very comfortable. And this does not apply, of course, to the 40 million people living below the poverty line, or the 2 million men and women in prison in the vast gulag archipelago of prisons which extend across the U.S. The United States no longer bothers about low-intensity conflicts. It no longer sees any point in being reticent or even devious. It puts its cards on the table without fear or favor. It quite simply doesn't give a damn about the United States or United Nations, international law, or critical dissent, which it regards as impotent and irrelevant. It has its own bleeding little lamb tagging behind it on a lead, the pathetic and supine Great Britain. What's happened to our moral sensibility? Do we ever have any? What do these words mean? What do they refer to? Do they refer to a term very rarely employed these days, conscious? A conscious to do not only with our own acts, but to do with our shared responsibility in the acts of others? Is all this dead? Look at Guantanamo Bay. Hundreds of people detained without charge for over 3 years with no legal representation or due process. Technically detained forever. This totally illegitimate structure is maintained in defiance of the Geneva Convention. It is not only tolerated, but hardly thought about by what's called the international community. This criminal outrage is being committed by a country which declares itself to be the leader of the free world. Do we think about the inhabitants of Guantanamo Bay? What does the media say about them? They pop up occasionally, a small item on page 6. They have been consigned to a no man's land from which indeed they may never return. At present, many are on hunger strike, being force-fed, including British residents. No niceties in these force-feeding procedures, no sedative or anesthetic, just this tube stuck up your nose, into your throat. You vomit blood. This is torture. What has the British Foreign Secretary said about this? Nothing. What has the British Prime Minister said about this? Nothing. Why not? Because the United States has said to criticize our conduct in Guantanamo Bay constitutes an unfriendly act. You're either with us or against us. So Blair shuts up. The invasion of Iraq was a bandit act, an act of blatant state terrorism, demonstrating absolute contempt for the conception of international law. The invasion was an arbitrary military act, inspired by a series of lies upon lies and gross manipulations of the media, and therefore the public, an act intended to consolidate American military and economic control of the Middle East, masquerading as a last resort. All other justifications have failed to justify themselves. Masquerading as a last resort, all other justifications having failed to justify themselves as liberation. A formidable assertion of military force responsible for the death and mutilation of thousands and thousands of innocent people. Over 1 million now. Multiple millions. We have brought torture, cluster bombs, depleted uranium, innumerable acts of random murder, misery, degradation, and death to the Iraqi people, and call it bringing freedom to democracy, bringing freedom and democracy to the Middle East. How many people do you have to kill before you qualify to be described as a mass murderer and a war criminal? 100,000? More than enough, I would have thought. Therefore, it is just that Bush and Blair be arraigned before the International Criminal Court of Justice. But Bush has been clever. He has not ratified the International Criminal Court of Justice. Therefore, if any American soldier, or for that matter politician, find himself in the dock, Bush has warned that he will send in the Marines. But Tony Blair has ratified the court and is therefore available for prosecution. We can let the court have his address if they're interested. It is number 10 Downing Street, London. Death in this context is irrelevant. Both Bush and Blair placed death well away on the back burner. At least 100,000 Iraqis were killed by American bombs and missiles before the Iraq insurgency began. These people are of no moment. Their deaths don't exist. They are blank. They're not even recorded as being dead. We don't do body counts, said the American General Tommy Fax. Early in the invasion, there was a photograph published on the front page of British newspapers of Tony Blair kissing the cheek of a little Iraqi boy. A grateful child, said the caption. A few days later, there was a story on photograph on the inside page of another 4-year-old boy with no arms. His family had been blown up by a missile. He was the only survivor. When do I get my arms back? He asked. When do I get my arms back? There'll be justice in the world when George Bush Jr. is forced to answer that question. Here's an extract from a poem by Pablo Neruda. I'm explaining a few things. And one morning, all that was burning. One morning, the bonfires leapt out of the earth, devouring human beings. And from then on fire, gunpowder from then on. And from then on blood. Bandits with planes and Moors. Bandits with finger rings and duchesses. Bandits with black friars spattering blessings. Came through the sky to kill children, and the blood of the children ran through the streets without fuss, like children's blood. Jackals, and the jackals would despise stones, and that jackals that the jackals would despise, stones that the dry thistle would bite on and spit out, vipers that the vipers would abominate. Face to face with you, I have seen the blood of Spain tower like a tide to drown you in one wave of pride and knives. Treacherous generals, see my dead house. Look at broken Spain. From every house burning metal flowers instead of flowers. From every socket of Spain, Spain emerges. And from every dead child, a rifle with eyes. And from every crying, bullets are born, which will one day find the bull's eye of your hearts. And you will ask, why doesn't his poetry speak of dreams and leaves and the great volcanoes of his native land? Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. This makes Harold Pinter a man in my book. Look up the speech that he gave during the Nobel Prize acceptance, and then he died shortly after. It's long, and we're nearing the end of what I'm doing. But who do you respect and why in life? All you have to do in this world is defend your words and actions. That's all you have to do. It's very simple. That was a long tangent. Have an analogous point in the book, an organization talk about depleted uranium and Gulf War syndrome. They are trying to bring attention to troops coming home and their problems. Talk with a sense of sarcasm about the tons of rounds of discharge in Iraq, possibility for exposure, especially for those who did more than one tour, the inhumanity of exposing our troops to such long doses of depleted uranium without at very least providing for their care back home. Have some details in Iraq about munitions lying everywhere and the sickness caused. What When a shell lined in depleted uranium goes through a tank or vehicle, how it spreads. I have a friend who came back, he had a rash, it's unexplained. People come back with sicknesses, they're unexplained. We're not taking care of our troops. Studies by medical corps psychiatrists of combat fatigue cases found that the fear of killing, rather than the fear of being killed, was the most common cause of battle failure, and that the fear of failure ran a strong second. Not the fear of being killed. A man accepts his death. It's one of the first things you have to accept to be a man. It's the fear of killing, and then the fear of failing others. Arab proverb, if you want a rabbit, take a rabbit. If you want a gazelle, go ahead, settle for a rabbit. Me and my brother against a cousin, me and my cousin against a stranger. The mud gets wetter. Escape is 2/3 of manliness. Everything short of death is acceptable. When the pot starts to boil over, it boils over very fast. October 20th, 2002, Saddam declares full and complete amnesty for all prisoners in jail. Complicated things when you have a bunch of criminals escaping jail. Wilfred Gibson, 1878 to 1962. Back. Oh, that's what it's a poem. It's called Back. They ask me where I've been, and what I've done and seen. But what can I reply? Who know it wasn't I, but someone just like me who went across the sea, and with my head in hands, killed men in foreign lands, though I must bear the blame, because he bore my name. Have Fran slip this note to Nick, trying to help with his guilt, and brothers trying to help each other heal for war. Carly Sheehan, A Nation Rocked to Sleep. Have you ever heard the sound of a mother screaming for her son? The torrential rains of a mother's weeping will never be done. They call him a hero. You should be glad he's won. But have you ever heard the sound of a mother screaming for her son? Have you ever heard the sound of a father holding back his cries? He must be brave because his boy died for another man's lies. The only grief he's allowed himself are long, deep sighs. Have you ever heard the sound of a father holding back his cries? Have you ever heard the sound of taps played at your brother's grave? They say he died so the flag will continue to wave, but I believe he died because he had oil to save. Have you ever heard the sound of taps played at your brother's grave? Have you ever heard the sound of a nation being rocked to sleep? The leaders want to keep you numb so the pain won't be so deep. But if we, the people, let them continue, another mother will weep. Have you ever heard the sound of a nation being rocked to sleep? It sounds a lot like a fucking Marvel blockbuster movie. Opinion on YouTube of an Iraq raid video post. Let CIA run the Iraq show and let forces be brought back immediately. Al-Qaeda was a brainchild of the CIA. CIA knows how to make and break such entities. That was on a YouTube video, a comment. Now I'm just throwing scraps in there I'm finding. Do some YouTube research for Iraq and Medina. Have the opening of the book be a dramatic Fallujah fight. Maybe instead of a Fallujah, have it be a city with a castle in the center, or a combination of the two. Have a Fallujah-style assault on a city with a castle in the center. Have it majestic, real adventurous movie war style. Of course, interspersed with the detail of a person's point of view who's describing it. Is this Nick? Write notes while in bed at the Swamp Camp Medic Station with a slight injury. Nick's mind state is still all adventure. Clearly show his mind state at the beginning of the book when in Iraq versus the end. Have them be completely different people. So Nick is furiously writing on his notepads, the action interrupted by comments like he got a fresh sheet of paper or he wiped drops of sweat from his dry sheets, smudging the lines. The importance of having a flourished Nick opening is to have the war painted heroically once in the beginning, and then the story begins. You think it's heroic, and then the action devolves into a sad fable and unravels, giving a glimpse to Nick and the beginning of his problems. What the fuck are we at? Shit. And that is the last page, and then we have just an H on the last page. Giving a glimpse to Nick in the beginning of his problems. So that is my personal, emotional, family, autobiographical ties to the war in Iraq and me trying to obtain an objective picture of it, interspersed with a lot of digressions, a lot of emotions, a lot of stuff to unpack. I have it recorded, and I can watch this recording. And this is also a capsule, November 13th now, or maybe 14th, I forgot now, 2018, as we try to reclaim the historic record among humanity, as it involves the narrative of my life. Thank you for watching.